In a lot of ways, we're abstracted, we're hypnotized, we're anesthetized, and we have all these ways to keep avoiding. But that there's sort of a practical way to break down our human experience to actually track how is the natural world impacting me just now. It's things like we're a sensory body, we have sensations. So even just being impacted by like your walk or being out in the desert and feeling this sandstone ancient timekeeper, these rock formations, and being receptive to that can impact us in as sensation, as the five senses, instinctual, emotional tone, the mind, but also visionary states can arise. But this is sort of the practical thing that everyone could learn and remember how to actually become porous, to listen to the outer psyche. It's a listening. And then when you receive it and there's skills you can learn, then you let it impact you and you see what arises on its own. And that arising is always right on track. It's the original intelligence working through us. So little by little we start to learn, oh, listening isn't just about hearing the sound. Maybe you hear the birds outside. It's about hearing and receiving the sounds and seeing what happens under the skin and allowing ourselves to stay in wonder and stay dimensional to that sound. And the natural world is coherent. It doesn't abstract out of itself, in my opinion. It's just clear. And there's all these forms which matter, and they're all relatives, and they all have different medicines. Ponderosa tree, it could be rattlesnake, it could be dragonfly, it could be humming, it could be anything.
Integrating Consciousness is a podcast dedicated to exploring the myriads of modalities available to support the collective in the journey of self-discovery, growth, and the integration of new insights gained. At its core, this podcast is rooted in philanthropy and a commitment to serving others as we navigate profound energetic shifts together. We find ourselves in an extraordinary era where old paradigms are being questioned and science is increasingly aligning with the timeless wisdom of ancient spiritual traditions. This shift in consciousness is palatable, inviting individuals to embark on a journey of personal evolution. This is an exhilarating time of transformation and insight, and this podcast is here to support you with free resources and offerings. Guests, including myself, generously contribute coaching sessions, books, apps, workshops, and more to empower your growth. My intentions are to create a space that nurtures personal expansion by offering a treasure trove of knowledge, tools, strategies, and inspirations through diverse and thoughtful guests. The bulk of the guests invited to this podcast are actively working and accepting one-on-one clients, making this a space where you can not only learn about but access some of the most incredibly authentic individuals who are truly dedicated to being of service to those who are doing the inner work, healing, expanding, and growing. Your support is vital to sustaining and growing this philanthropic endeavor. By subscribing, liking, sharing, and rating the podcast, you help me amplify these voices, their work, and their wisdom. If our work resonates with you, we welcome your love and your kindness in keeping this project thriving and accessible to all. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. So thank you, and may you recognize the powerful creator you are. Jonah, it is such a pleasure to have you in this space and to get to be able to share space with you and really explore your work at a deeper level. So thank you for being here today with me.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm honored to be here.
Nice. So I have a question for you. What does it mean to become porous?
I think for me, becoming porous means our ability to listen and stay dimensional. Becoming porous means so much, especially in relationship with the natural world, with Mother Earth, with the mystery, and to let ourselves be porous to it means that we're welcoming that greater conversation and allowing ourselves to be dreamed or reorganized by Earth and by mystery towards wholeness. And we're actually remembered. We become remembered by Earth. And there's just so far I could go with all the way back to remembering our original instructions and having the tools to be permeable to life, to let life be alive through us. And it's it does feel like it's starting to encapsulate a lot of the body of my work. Well, being porous means also staying dimensional. Sensory, five senses, instincts, emotions, mind, mythopoetic, and to let ourselves be informed and let ourselves become through that greater dreaming as the offering itself, which is Earth herself for me. Yeah, so much there.
So, what comes up for me and what I'm hearing as you speak these words is that when you say porous, that we're becoming truly open vessels, that consciousness can move through us. So, it's in having done a little bit of this practice with you prior to jumping on, you were so kind to guide me through a little bit. But what I recognized from that brief experience and what you're saying is porous is allowing yourself to have this ability to merge with nature and the surroundings around you. For me, it was to recognize oneness and that there's information in all of this energy that's around us, and being vessels to receive this information, and then also to give this information, to give back not only to the planet and to this huge, beautiful sentient being that we are a part of and that we live on and that we rely on, but also to give back to our brothers and sisters, because as we ingest what we're receiving as these porous beings, we're also transmuting and offering back out to what you refer to as the village, or we could even see as our brothers and sisters, or to those around us in our communities.
Yeah, to keep life alive, be permeable to the life and the aliveness that's wanting to happen through us. And it can be kind of tracked specifically. And in that is also the transfiguring of trauma. And there's a lot of grief that lives there that also gets cooked out. So it's like in the becoming porous, we also need each other. We also need the village to hold one another, to grieve, to praise, to meet those the more less pleasant things that we go through. And we need that collective body together to help with that transfiguring.
So when you speak to becoming porous, something else that comes up for me is it feels like activism in a way. And that activism, which you've brought up in conversation, but this activism feels like a push against the very Descartes concept and understanding of nature, that nature is to be dominated and controlled and wrangled. And it's this very misogynistic and patriarchal behavior and even perception, which at one point might have served us. We can't quite say, but it happened. It's historical, and it's a big part of the human thinking today that we are separate from nature, that we are material beings. And what I'm hearing from you is to become porous is this invitation to another way of perceiving the spiritual self, the human self, and the connection to the world around us and to nature, right? which feels like an echo to a very indigenous concept of being and moving within the world.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, what arises for me is it is a form of resistance. Yeah, it is a resistance to the current paradigm. And yeah, there is a protector that arises in me just hearing you say that. Yeah, at the bullseye. And being receptive is a counterforce to the mistreatment of Mother Earth, of the hypnosis of capitalism and colonization, and that Earth is this kind of dead thing that we use. It's all animate. It's beauty. It's life. It's spirit itself. And so it's back to honor. It's back to listening, reverence. Yeah. Being in receptivity is honoring all the life that's already been given.
Mhm.
And there's responsibility there.
Mhm.
Yeah. I love this thread. And that responsibility is why I'm speaking right now, to honor life and to help life be alive, as Martin Practel would say.
Mhm.
He's one of my favorite teachers, elder teachers.
Mm.
And how do we keep life alive? And to me, being porous is a huge part of that. I'm humbling myself to the natural world. I'm receiving, it's already happening, but I'm becoming conscious of it. And it's remembering my body literally, and it's trackable back into that connection of home, which is earth and our relatives. And then from there, there's a coherence, and that coherence exists in nature. And from there, we are more able to connect with our gift that we're here to bring. There's a lot of different ways to do that and to help us keep that soul thread alive. But I feel like, in a way, I feel like I owe it to her. I owe it to the mystery to do my part in the listening, and letting myself be transfigured, to grieve when I need to, when grief is there, to let it rip, and hopefully in community, at least with one other person. And I have a great brother here that I live with, that we do a lot of this work together. And it's just amazing just to have one other, but we need each other. We need each other to do this work too. Yeah.
So I recognize this conversation becoming porous and the power of having one other or community or village, right? I have context for this because I've spent some time with you and we've had conversation. But for those who are just meeting you and just learning about you and are stumbling upon this conversation of becoming porous, how can we further articulate what becoming porous is? Is it a mindset? Is it a concept? Is it a new practice that could be introduced into Western psychological or therapeutic practices? Is this merely dedicated to those who are doing somatic work?
Mhm.
Can we contextualize this and give it texture?
I love it. I feel little tears in my eyes as I revisit the quest site. I did a fasting rite with this in southern Utah, and this 4 days that I spent in the desert, and the beauty of the natural world and spirit. And it is actually trackable, and the skills are teachable on how to snap out of the hypnosis that we're just our minds. In a lot of ways, we're abstracted, we're hypnotized, we're anesthetized, and we have all these ways to keep avoiding. But that there's a practical way to break down our human experience, to to actually track how is the natural world impacting me just now. And it's things like we're a sensory body, we have sensations. So even just being impacted by your walk or being out in the desert and feeling this sandstone ancient timekeeper, these rock formations, and being receptive to that can impact us in as sensation, as the five senses, instinctual, emotional tone, the minds, but also visionary states can arise. But this is the practical thing that everyone could learn and remember how to actually become porous, to listen to the outer psyche. It's a listening. And then when you receive it and there's skills you can learn, then you let it impact you and you see what arises on its own. And that arising is always right on track. It's the original intelligence working through us. Little by little, we start to learn, oh, listening isn't just about hearing the sound, maybe hear the birds outside. It's about hearing and receiving the sounds and seeing what happens under the skin and allowing ourselves to stay in wonder and stay dimensional to that sound. And the natural world is coherent. It doesn't abstract out of itself, in my opinion. It's just clear. And there's all these forms which matter, and they're all relatives, and they all have the medicines. So it could be a ponderosa tree, it could be rattlesnake, it could be dragonfly, be humming, it could be anything. And receiving it could be the snow outside. Currently in Bozeman, Montana, we get 2 feet of snow outside. So it's just letting myself orient to beauty and receiving the snow and seeing what happens. And just as I do it now, I felt actually a little expansion in this area of my chest. So that's not mental. There's actually the sensation of expansion. That is listening. That's the becoming porous. So the expansion happens here. And then I stay in the wonder. And that's letting kind of mystery have its way, always towards home.
What's coming up for me is we had a conversation earlier before recording about surrender, the concept of surrender to nature. And what you're saying now brings back up that conversation of when I talked about when I used to surf and I would surrender to the movement of the waves whenever I was paddling out and got knocked off my board, or I'd just finished with a wave and came off my board, and there'd be sets of waves that would push me down to the ocean floor. And there's those who would resist and try to force and go up through the wave and come up on top of the board and paddle out. And
Yeah.
for me, it was very much a relationship with the ocean and the waves and the movement of the ocean, which was to surrender and allow myself to be moved and tossed and not to create any muscular resistance. And so I was being given information as to which wave this was in the set and if there was another 3 waves immediately behind it. And so as you're speaking, I hear this surrender and merging and giving yourself over to nature, which for many of us living in urban environments we live in nature poverty. And for some people, there's not even a tree, but maybe there's a dandelion growing through the cracks of the cement. And I'm speaking to my brothers and sisters in the Bronx of New York and these, parts of Detroit and these very urban settings where they're starved for nature and they don't even realize it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a coming home, as you mentioned, as we immerse ourselves in nature and allow ourselves to be porous, to receive the information that's coming to us, to provide us with data in every cellular membrane of our body. And then being so in the moment and so present that we can actually feel our body respond to it, not intellectually. We don't, but somatically within the body.
Yeah. Somatically, yeah. And when I say somatic, I'm talking about dimensionally. And what came through listening to you with the inner city where they're nature deprived, that dandelion is the same beauty. It's the same beauty that if you're in Montana and you're out in the wilderness and there's not a house in sight and there's grizzly bear and there's so much naturalness in the Bronx or wherever. If you have that one dandelion, it's the same beauty. It's the same organizing force. It's the same spirit. Martin Prechtel says, the garden never left. You left the garden. You lost contact with the garden. So that reality is always here. And I know it's so much harder when you're in a city. So I really do empathize with that. But I also look for ways that, gardens, inner city gardens, even if you can just orient to the sky, to sun, to rain, to maybe there's even just bits of that clear reflection, because Earth is always there for us, and it's the clearest mirror, and it's always nourishing. That one dandelion, yeah, it's enough in one sense if you had the tools, and I think we do have to teach these skills again, which what I call eco-somatics. I used to just call it land-based somatics. Eco-somatics became a thing. Eco-depth psychology. These kinds of animist ways of remembering that everything's animate. And you go even deeper, even the structures are of earth, been transformed into this table and these walls. And so it's a perceptual skill that you learn how to perceive reality, really.
I'm popping in with a gentle reminder of how transcendental work can support you in becoming a conscious architect of your personal reality. Many of us move through life feeling stuck, hopeless, unfulfilled, or even resentful, trapped in a reality that feels handed to us rather than consciously created. Transcendental work helps identify and shift energetic patterns rooted in limiting beliefs, conditioned mindsets, and inherited perspectives of reality that keep us from fully embracing life's possibilities. Through isolating patterns, false and limiting beliefs, and the elaborate stories that come with such programming, then we start to dismantle and regain access to aspects of ourselves that have been frozen in time or long forgotten. This work includes inner exploration, mindset and pattern recognition, intergenerational healing, and transformative modalities that reshape not only our external experiences, but also our perception of ourselves, freeing us from subconscious traps designed for self-protection, yet keeping us stuck. You are far more powerful than you realize, and you came into this life for a reason. And as a transcendental coach, my role is to guide you back home to yourself, help you identify your purpose, align with your path, and manifest the life you truly desire. And if this sounds too good to be true, consider that doubt may just be another subconscious mechanism keeping you limited. So if you're ready to explore how this work can support you, book a free discovery call, and together we'll uncover where you're at, where you want to be, and how to start building the life that you were meant to live, truly becoming an architect of your reality. So thank you, and may you recognize the powerful creator you are. Enjoy the remainder of the episode. I have had you in conversation before where you've said nature is spirit and using eco-somatics to experience that. And that was a powerful statement for me when you said that, because we have a culture today that is very open to wanting to have the experience of channeling or communicating with spirit, right? Spirit guides, or just spirit or source. And when you said to me, nature is spirit, it really grabbed me because that has been a belief of mine since I was a child. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't remember it ever being learned. It was always known, right? And so nature, for those who are trying to channel their guides or channel spirit, who perceive spirit or guides outside of us, right? Or outside of this planet. Maybe they're aliens in another universe.
Mm-hmm.
Spirit is nature. Nature is spirit
Yeah.
communicating.
Yeah, it's the same. It's synonymous for me. It's animated by spirit and mystery. That same dandelion is spirit manifest into form and becoming permeable to that. We're allowing this form. It's like, it's not just this formless, formless and form. And we are form. I have this body and I have this skin membrane or whatever. And then becoming porous is actually using our five senses to let the outer psyche, which is the natural world and mystery, um, letting it in, letting that dandelion in and see how it informs you. Because it's always resourcing in the best sense. It's always like you're always being informed and remembered back into essence of who you are. But it's not without the pain. It includes the pain and includes the grief. Because we start having a sort of ecological awakening that look what we're doing to Earth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's doing
absolutely.
everything for us and giving everything. We already have enough. It's all enough.
Mm-hmm.
So those kind of things that have happened start to break down and also through our bodies. And it's just something you have to wrestle with and meet with each other in that safety, that village safety. Being permeable is a gritty act, and it's also so beautiful. So it's you start to feel your bandwidth widens, you start to feel more praise for life, and you also start to grieve a little bit more because you love so much what you're awakening to being in contact with life.
Mm. There's so much wisdom and so much beauty there. And for the listener or the viewer who is, okay, this sounds wonderful. I want to be there. So how the hell how do I do this?
Yeah.
Can you maybe share some introductions to the technique for that person that has found that single dandelion growing through the
Mm-hmm.
cracks of the Bronx, or for that individual that has a park in their neighborhood that they can navigate to, or even that person that's living out in the wilderness?
Yes, yes. I want to offer these tools. So one of my favorite ways to introduce this work is to do what you and I did together, the head, heart, belly. So it's letting your consciousness be in your head, which a lot of us are used to as the primary way to orient to the world. But it's also easy to objectify life from there. So letting your awareness move downward in space into your heart and then into your belly, to your attention actually resting in your belly. And then with eyes closed, let yourself find your belly. Say maybe you're sitting next to that dandelion, or you're out in the woods or by the river. Everyone can do this if there's a little bit of nature accessible or a lot. You can rest in your belly and then just gently play with seeing if you can see the world from your belly. And that automatically makes us a bit more receptive And we want to be more receptive because that's towards becoming more permeable to mystery. And so the skill would be head, heart, belly, rest in your belly. Let your eyes orient to beauty in your surroundings and let beauty find you. And then let it in and notice in a dimensional way what happens under the skin, or it can happen around you too. And just stay curious, and it happens. And then knowing that we have all these different ways of listening, we have five senses. Our emotional body is a form of listening. Sadness might come up, or joy. You allow that as part of the orchestration, like life orchestrating through you. And then something always happens next. So it's about building presence and staying in wonder. And I have found that it's always towards essence and coherence eventually, but it's not without cooking the grief, or sometimes it brings up the trauma too, the heartbreak. And sometimes you can catch it early and just feel good too. So if you're doing head, heart, belly, and you're orienting to beauty, let the beauty in and let it feed you. Let yourself be fed by the original beauty.
What I'm hearing also is that there's an invitation to sit in a place of grief. And we are a culture that has been trying to avoid what we perceive as negative feelings. And we're doing it at such an extent that we're medicating with pharmaceuticals that primary mechanism is to numb and disassociate and distract. We're self-medicating with street drugs that do the same. We use alcohol, we use substances, we use materialism, consumerism, and we use distractions and numbing mechanisms such as TV. And then even with the mass legalization of marijuana, which I don't think anyone should be incarcerated for indulging in something such as that. However, there's a truth that hasn't been divulged, and that it is very much a numbing mechanism to distract us from this place of grief, and being able to lean in and sit with grief is just as important as the parent who can sit with the child who is having a tantrum or a fit or having an experience of grief. It's just as important for a parent to do that with a child, to hold space, as it is for us to hold space for ourselves in a place of grief, and not to push it away, move from it. And what I'm hearing is that Eco-Somatics is very much an invitation to sit with that if it comes up for you.
Yeah, it seems innate to these times that we're in. I like to speak to it so people expect it and nothing wrong is going on. The more we awaken to our senses, the more we let in the beauty, the other pole shows up, which is the grief. And to people to know that grief is our love of life. So grief and love are the same thing. And we can't grieve if we can't love. So it's two sides of the same coin. And I'd also say that we need each other to grieve, and that we can't actually really fully grieve alone. Francis Weller is a great teacher for that, The Wild Edge of Sorrow. He speaks about grief it needs containment and relief. And if we're doing it for ourselves, then we're both the container, and so that we can't actually release. So we need at least one other, a village, and for me, preferably some land, even better near the ocean, to grieve properly. If I had the ideal, it would be, say you were the one in a grief moment, and it was there. I preferably would want a small crew of us with you, with Mother Ocean, so you could just fall apart together with us. And we're holding that thread, we're holding that village heart. And because of the lack of village, we don't have that sort of even biological safety to really let it rip and really look bad and really fall apart, which is the alchemy of grief. And it's a portal. The times that I really grieved it, sometimes it will take you really into a shimmering darkness that has potency, and it's not all that scary, especially if you have each other. So I end up doing a lot of grief work even through Zoom because it's better than nothing. It's preferably in person, but it works even through Zoom, the grief work together. I'm less and less afraid of it. I actually love it. And it actually feeds me when I see someone grieving because I know that it's because they're showing their heart and how much they love. You know?
Yeah. I think it's incredibly
So, yeah.
important to be able to move that energy outward. And we recognize on a scientific level in terms of energy and the impact of energy. And numerous other cultures have recognized this as well, the prana and the chi, and the importance of being able to move grief out of the body. And when we don't move grief out of the body, we get stagnation. So we start looking at inflammation in the body. We start looking at terminal illness and the breaking down. And this manifests in different ways for so many different people. And when we speak about grief, something that really comes up for me is how much grief is in the collective, which means like how much of society is not allowing themselves to feel their grief, let alone even holding space for another person in grief, because we're still threaded to this paradigm of toxic masculinity that we're moving away from. And that masculinity in that space of toxicity, the belief system was that grief was weakness. And this is only an illusion of a belief that does not empower us and support us as a human being, as a spiritual being having a human experience, and as community. And so when you speak to a group of people holding space for an individual to really empower them in moving that force of energy, it's force outward, it really takes me back to the concept of indigenous cultures in specific sweat lodge ceremonies for people who are grieving, and how people, complete strangers, come together to hold space for those who are in grief and in suffering and need to pass it through. And something I'd like to also introduce or invite the listener to is, in your mind, what would it look like and feel like to just collapse and have people who you feel safe around you holding you, but just to collapse and just sob and grieve and truly move that energy outward? And for some people, there's a resistance of, I don't need that. I don't want that. That feels uncomfortable. And then for other people, there might be this almost this collapse inward of, I need that. I want that. That's something that I really need that would help me move forward in my own healing process and trauma and coming closer to self. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so beautiful when you actually can stay in contact with the grief and let it metabolize, because I feel like there's a transfiguring and there's a newness or a freshness from the potency that's born out of that. Like something composting isn't dead. There's magic in it. There's magic in grief. It's love. That's the loving heart of that person that we're holding that's actually coming forward. It's so beautiful. So if we could orient to grief as beauty, as love itself expressing itself, we want to actually get closer to it. which they do in a lot of more indigenous cultures. I'm thinking of like the Maya. Someone's grieving, come closer, don't go further away. Listen, listen to, because it's holy. And
Mm.
grief is holy.
So your background, and I'd like to preface this for the viewers who don't know you, but you have, in my opinion, a really incredible wealth of knowledge. And when you navigate your background in terms of certifications and field work and time spent learning, it tells an incredible story, I think, about you as an individual, and as a soul having a human experience. And what I see from my lens is a story when I see all of these different explorations. And I see a story of an individual who is not only learning and navigating these different techniques and explorations of spiritual belief systems, or even of science, or some form of Western therapy, concepts of nature. I see it as a story of an individual who's exploring himself deeper so that he can offer to the collective. And so I see these explorations as personal experiences and exploration of self. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that, and if you could also help us understand why you've navigated through all these numerous different experiences, from somatic experiencing practitioner, biodynamic, craniosacral therapist, a board certified polarity therapy practitioner. We also have work with children and babies through advanced somatic verbal skills, and Hatha yoga certification with the Sivananda Yoga Forest Academy, and then even Tibetan healing acupressure. Acupressure, yeah. So there's just like a really incredible wealth of knowledge and diversity. Like, it's not linear. And so I find it really unique and intriguing.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm over here being touched. Uh, Something's being touched. I'm being touched by beauty in this conversation. Thinking about, it's almost starting to become one thing. It doesn't necessarily matter all the tools. And I would laugh because I'm like, I didn't choose it. It's just been a wild ride. It's been a journey, and something in me does move towards it, something deeper. And the self is being deconstructed. And one of my biggest prayers is to become an elder someday. And I'm starting to be more and more aware that in order to do that, I have to die in a certain way. So when I hear all that, I also feel so much love that I have for the natural world. Has been a big part of it's all been towards beauty, it feels, and it's starting to really simplify. Like Pat McCabe quotes Danae Elder saying, "We're born into beauty as beauty for a joyful life." And that's the truth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it brings grief, and praise are in that prayer. And all of these things have guided me towards that,
Mm-hmm.
remembering it actually is the reality. So these tools have come together as I'm dying and letting myself be porous, it's like you're being dreamed by the original mother, the original design starts coming through more, and you want to stand for that. You want to stand for that original beauty and as that beauty. So it's becoming more village minded, like the togetherness, orienting to the land, orienting to beauty, ceremony, grieving together, praising together, sharing meals. And each one of these tools they're handy. They're my toolkit
Mhm.
to be able to stay present through when the trauma shows up,
Mhm.
when the grief shows up,
Mhm.
and to have that skill. Yeah, a lot of tools. And
Mhm.
I'm so grateful for all the elders and it's
Mhm.
still never ending. And I can feel now, even as I speak with you, that there's parts of me that are still dying and becoming with village, and just keep saying yes to mystery, keep saying yes to earth.
Mhm. Something that comes up for me is, as you said, you've talked about the dying process. And for those who might not quite understand, but there's, in this dying process, which is the deprogramming of the ego, right? We go through the beginning of our lives being programmed by our culture, our society, our parents, family, even the era, right? The belief systems of the 80s is different than the belief systems
Mhm.
of those in the 2000s or even today and of the 60s. And so there is a deprogramming and even being decolonized, right? So
Yes.
shedding
Yes.
and letting go of. And I can speak to my practice coaching a lot of the clients that I have. When they come to me, they think that they need more of something. I need more of
Right.
this. I need more of that. I'm not feeling good. So I more and more. And it's actually the reverse. It's the deprogramming. It's the letting go of the shedding or the dying process, which we look at egoic deaths in the dark night of the soul. And
Mm.
so it's this process of what can I let go of? Because we've hoarded outside of the programming in our adulthood, early adulthood, we start hoarding and gathering and collecting what we think we need to be recognized, to be self actualized, or even self realized, which is what I believe you've referred to as a false reality. And this work that you've done has created sensitivities to the false reality, which is today's lifestyle.
Hmm.
Wondering what comes up for you when
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. What comes up again is I think there the doorway for me often is orienting to beauty, and orienting to beauty specifically in the natural world if we can. And if that's not available, orienting to beauty anywhere and being receptive to it is our birthright, because in beauty is the original design. Look at a plant, a flower, anything has that original nature. There's a there's a sequencing that happens to us if we receive that remembers us back home. And it's such a beautiful tool to start to recognize that we have that. And then when we start to recognize home, this is the thread that bringing up what you just shared, then we start to recognize what's not that from a place of a sense of home. When we start to land into that coherence, into that I am that I am, I do belong. That's actually the truth. Born into beauty, as beauty, for joyful life. That's the truth. That's like meeting what's already and always being given, and actually in an embodied way. And usually, what my experience is, I feel a sense of I belong. Right. So you have that belonging or that home feeling. And then it's amazing, our perceptions change. We start to see what's not that.
Mhm.
And it's not like all love and light. Orienting to beauty doesn't mean there's not grief there or trauma
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
It means that we're starting to feel home, and there's grief in that. So then we can start to see how we're abstracting out of that actual truth, which we have to include and digest and decolonize the mind, really. So it's like a natural squeezing. It's a pulse with earth and mystery that sort of squeezes out the lies that we've been told, the hypnosis, the anesthesia, the amnesia and anesthesia, is what an elder had said, Francis Weller. Those two things together, the big part of this current paradigm that we're in. And to break the spell of that, orient to beauty, orient in that way, and then see if we can be together, at least two people or more, to start to hold each other in these spaces of metabolizing and letting go of these old stories back into belonging and togetherness. Yeah. And some of us need to maybe are holding a thread for that, which I think sometimes is my role with the gathering the tools can stay steady. And we take turns sometimes being steady for each other through the waves, right? Through these bigger waves. But spotting it, I think, I'm like, I see you. I see that, like, how you're abstracting this thing that is actually taking me away from myself, taking us out of relationship, right?
Yeah. What
Like,
I'm hearing
yeah.
is changing. So with a focus on nature and with a focus on beauty, that we're changing our perspective of reality. And if we look at this from a scientific lens, as we are changing our perspective and what we see and what we're focusing on, and we're now becoming more focused on nature, beauty, and also the synchronicities that come to us when we're in a space of I call it consuming, where it's all encompassing. You're consumed rather than you are consuming beauty. Beauty is consuming you. So it's a reversal.
Yes.
And
Yeah, exactly.
and when I speak to this, I'm speaking to this from a very subjective, personal space of having a really deep personal practice with this work that you're doing without knowing the terminology for it or even having been certified in any of this. Is work that I've done throughout my childhood that was very necessary for me because of my environment. And so there was a continuous immersion of self into nature and allowing myself to be encompassed or consumed by the beauty of nature around me so that I could intentionally, and I didn't know it then, but looking back on it, I was intentionally seeking beauty in nature to combat the personal experience that I was having that was the opposite of that. And I knew by immersing myself in that, that I was, through nature, supporting myself in resolving what could eventually be huge traumatic blocks for me. So I was healing myself through this process unknowingly at the time. And so when you speak to this work, I can say without a doubt that I think it's absolutely what's missing from the Western practice of psychology. I think it's wholeheartedly necessary. I believe it's what's missing from schools, not having the ability to really immerse ourselves as children in nature and learn the way that nature works and can even speak through us and touch us and support us, especially when we are alone and we don't have a community, a village, and we feel isolated. So this work, I believe
Beautiful.
is truly what's missing. It is the poverty. And it's not missing because
Yes,
it's
yes.
not there.
Right,
It's missing
exactly.
because
Yeah.
the majority, the collective of
Yeah.
humans are still operating in the false reality, which is the very Descartes, we are separate from nature philosophy, which is a sickness.
So, yes, and it's what I'm
Mm.
starting to understand is it's a perceptual shift.
Yes.
It's actually we start to, and this is the practical part of it that can actually be taught, and is that we can learn how to become porous. And I love your words of being swallowed
Mhm.
and being swallowed up
Mhm.
by the natural world.
Mhm.
And it's, you had as a child the intuitive sense to, or you were orienting that way, and I would say she was healing you, and she was doing it. And so
Yeah,
it's really
absolutely.
providing that exposure with the natural world and then supporting people with the tools to learn how to listen to it again, how to listen to her again, how to listen and be permeable, be porous to our relatives, human and more than human, mystery. I love it. And those two worlds can come together. That's to me where the trauma work gets involved. Cause like she's coming in and she's doing the metabolizing, and then maybe your guide, which I do a lot of trauma work with others, is to see how that polarity is at work that you just described so beautifully, right? So helping that process, just allowing it to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, and as we're in this space and I'm toggling between our conversation and also reflecting on my personal experience of being called into nature to be consumed by nature so that I could metabolize these experiences that were happening that I didn't have support or anyone to go to, there was the ability to release so that they wouldn't be blocked energy, which is what creates the trauma, right? The block of not being able to be present and really identify and understand and support myself in those moments and not having that as a child outside of myself. And so you said it was nature healing me in that moment as a child. And I
Uh,
completely agree with that. And I would even say that it was the reason it was innate is very similar to why a bird knows which direction to fly south for the winter. It's a part of the northern compass, this electromagnetic force within us to move towards nature to support us in our healing. And
yeah.
what comes up for me as I'm saying this is recognizing that there is a large demographic that probably doesn't have this because it's been so dimmed and so numbed and so quieted that this calling inside of themselves, they're as they're feeling something, some pain, some grief, or some traumatic event that's happening, or even a natural rhythm of the dying of the ego, which for me made me want to immerse myself into nature to be held through this experience.
Yeah.
There's
Right.
many people that don't
Exactly.
have that calling, or maybe they have it and they can't hear it. And
Yeah.
I'm really wondering if we can help support people to somatically recognize what that calling might feel like or sound like,
Hmm.
that calling to be pulled as though it's your northern compass or your electromagnetic field back into nature to be supported in whatever work it is that you're doing.
Yeah. I think what happens is often the signal is pain. We start to suffer. And there's a reason for that because it's in the design to be connected with her and each other. Like I more and more feel like togetherness is everything with each other and with the natural world and with mystery. And as we abstract out of that, we suffer more. So when you're in isolation, you suffer more.
Yes.
It's in the
Yes.
design. So I think a clue would be pain. There's a reason. Trust it. Trust the pain. Let yourself wander if you need to wander. it's orienting to things like you have an original gift and starting to feel that the original gift is you were born with it and that it's in the design for you to offer it. And sometimes that pain is the longing to belong, to offer your gift. I think that's the signal one way. And then so let yourself search, let yourself be lost.
Yeah.
Let yourself be lost with support.
Absolutely.
Makes me think of Bill Plotkin's work, Animus Valley Institute. He's an depth psychologist, agent, cultural regeneration, and does a lot of work with soul initiation and fasting rites, and really literally helping people to die with the land to more deeply connect with our original gift that we were born with. And I've worked with Animus Valley Institute, and it's incredible. And to start to know that, yeah, you can follow your longings. In other words, when the pain hits and things don't quite feel right, it's probably a good clue that they're not. Something's not right.
Yeah, we have these canaries in the coal mine. And again, circling back to being in a culture of numbing and disassociating and silencing. We have been numbing and silencing our bodies, telling us through depression that we're suppressing an aspect of ourselves, which through the work of Dr. Lisa Miller, we recognize is the suppression of spirituality. And there's now scientific data and studies, numerous peer-reviewed studies that support that people who are more spiritual, not religious, but spiritual, and who are feeling oneness and unity consciousness and are in a state of experiencing, being reminded, knowing that, practicing that, has a higher resistance. Their brains have a higher resistance to depression, and they have a greater flexibility that when they do go through a time of depression, that they're able to move out of it much more quickly and really just, it becomes a speed bump rather than like a barricade, right? And when we don't recognize that our depression is a suppression of self, of spiritual self, then we go to a doctor that prescribes us a antidepressant, which actually doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And actually it negatively affects our body in terms of healing itself. And so it's as though there is a canary in the coal mine letting us know that there's a warning us that something is coming about. And we just shoot the canary and think that the problem goes away. The methane's still coming, boo. You're about to get taken out.
Yeah, there's some signal there.
Yeah, absolutely.
To trust it.
The body knows.
Include it. And learning mindfulness helps to catch those thought forms and to include them in the, like, use the word tracking with Eco-Somatics is very, in a way, very practical. It's completely mysterious and beautiful and all of it. And there's a practicality that you can actually use mindfulness and tracking skills to be with your experience, to learn about your psyche, to let it inform you. Like, it works. That's why I'm still doing it, if remembering these things that our soul, I think, already knows, that we've forgotten, being colonized out of being wild, being dimensional, all these different intelligences.
So we spoke to Eco-Somatics, and I'm wondering if we can move into dimensional tracking and delve into that a little bit.
Yeah, it's the same thing. So dimensional tracking is staying having an open focus with your direct experience beyond just mental phenomena, sensations, five senses, instincts, emotions, mind, mythopoetic. So these are all things that you can be in contact with while they're happening, as well as like subtler forces. And with with the dimensional tracking, ecosomatics just means you're including the outer psyche, at least for me, and you're letting that mystery inform what's happening under the skin. So it's that dance, it's that greater conversation of letting yourself be dreamed and informed by mystery and earth. And it's always entertaining. It's always revelatory, and it'll bring you towards home. Dimensional tracking is fancy. It's paying attention. It's paying attention to what's happening. It's like deep form of listening. Yeah.
So you did a little bit of that with me prior to us jumping onto this recording. And just to offer a little context for those who would like to have an in-depth understanding of this, I'll share my experience. There was a part where we somatically went within the body so that I could experience the mind, heart, and soul, or mind, heart, and gut area. And so sitting in those spaces. And then as you asked me to open my eyes, it was not where I want to focus my attention, but where does my attention fall upon? What within my environment is grabbing my attention? And my attention had fallen upon, or something that I'd grabbed was some sage that I had started burning a few hours prior. And there was smoke rising from the sage that had been burning. And much of the smoke had left the room. It had been a significant amount of time that it had been burning. So it was, is that waning or waxing? It was waning. The smoke was waning. And my eyes, it called me and it grabbed me. It was in the corner of the room. And I saw just the last remnants of it. But it was this beautiful, steady stream that moved upward. And then I started reflecting on it, and I'd moved my eyes to you as I was talking to you. And then you invited me to go back to it. And as I moved back to it, it was gone. There was no more. So in that moment, I had caught it at the very last breath of it. And then as I went back into my body and sat with that experience of it, it was this mindfulness practice of what is that saying to you? What is that invoking within you? What are the feelings and the somatic experiences that were coming up for me? And so there were things coming up for me that very much circled back to what felt like a whisper or a synchronicity of something that was beyond myself, that I caught it within its last few seconds. And it felt like I was being offered a whisper. And as I sat in that whisper more, I was being shown symbols and images. And these images were taking me back to a moment within childhood. And then I was even moving to this moment of feeling this very strong presence of what felt like a masculine safety, right? And that's not something that I have had in my life. I would say that is the greatest void of experience within the masculine and feminine energies. And so that's also an area that I'm supporting myself in and working through mindset shifts and reframing, and also empowering that element within myself and not allowing it to be corrupted and move into the toxic realm. And so I'm doing that own inner work. And then I think there was a lot of that being evoked as I was being guided by somebody who was very strong and centered in his core and in his place. And so for me, I felt that there was a presence of you offering that container for me that then allowed me to subconsciously move back to a space of childhood where the sage was tethered. It took me to a memory of burning sage as a child, but in the presence of a father who was not a source of safety, of masculine safety, and or ever offered a masculine container of safety. Very the opposite.
Yeah.
And so I was getting that polarity and that experience, and it was all being woven together through this bit of smoke from sage. And so the tracking, you were taking me through these like tracking and just, so what's coming up for you now? Where did your eyes go from here? What's the sensation in your body? And so it's moving between all of these elements of self so that it was actually assisting me in staying out of my head, because now I was moving to my body. What is the sensation? Now I'm moving back to this experience. And so as you're jumping between all of these and giving a voice to all of these aspects of self, it started to bring about this whole person participation, and was very much an assistant of staying out of the head and not intellectualizing, because that's where we lose the whispers. That's where we lose the guidance of spirit, right? Is when we're in the head. And for those who have heard some of my previous episodes, I do talk about divination tools and how they help support us in our intuition. And so for me, I almost felt like this somatic tracking was almost a form of divination tool that allowed me to move deeper within myself, feel intuitions and intuitive nudges that were coming from the subconscious, and allowing it to come forward and up. And it was almost permission because I was participating in this space.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
The permission and the allowing is the reorganizing nature of your nature, and it's happening moment to moment. So yeah, you were staying in the wonder, and it's nice to have a support, and offering that clarity of safety allowed you to go there.
Yeah,
that would be my words of it, and reorganize.
Absolutely.
And we learn about the psyche, and then I would add to we're not demonizing the mind. Then the mind starts to become in service that reorganizing, and then it catches up later. That's the way I like to share. And also with the earth, when we're listening with the earth and we're being transformed by earth and transfigured by it, then the mind becomes more in service to that instead of running the show. So we were working together in that way too, because we are earth. And that and somatic intelligence that we're talking about, you start to learn how to trust it, because you could see how perfectly that kind of unfolded for you.
Yeah.
And that's what's support and togetherness. Then the design, the mystery comes forward and shows, and you see how the psyche is working, and it gives opportunity for something different. And I think it can be prophetic. It is spirit working
through
us, on us, but in a very kind of embodied, practical, grounded way. You're actually with it. It's the contactfulness that to me allows for the embodiment.
That brings up something for me in today's, God, I want to say neo-spiritual age. Like there's a lot going on. There's a lot happening in it that is taking us further away from self, especially on platforms where there's a lot of content creation. And there's a lot of selling of workshops on teaching you how to channel your guides and channel a spirit. And what this comes up for me is you already have that ability within you. It's not that you have to do more. It means actually doing less. It means going back into yourself and listening. And through that moment, I was channeling. Through that moment, I was allowing the somatics of my body and my mind to be of service to what was happening within my body rather than dictating and guiding and leading, which it wants to do. And we've given it permission to do for so long, which has corrupted, I believe, the human experience and has created a ripple effect within our economies and society and even in academia, where we've given too much permission and authority to this one brain, right? We have the heart brain and we have the gut brain. They all have neurological pathways. The heart actually sends far more electricity and creates far more than the skull brain. And for some reason, we've created a society that's moved away from these two powerful forces. And when that mind became of service to my somatic experience, it allowed me to work through and process something that I have been asking to work through, that has been a energetic nudge within me to work through. And so being given the space and the support by another individual who could hold that space for me allowed me the safety to really bring that forward. And so I would say that is the channeling of your guides, the channeling of spirit coming through you, speaking to you. And what ultimately was offered to me, which I had articulated to you, you asked, what did it feel like? And I said, it feels like a choice. It felt like, and you said, you were asking me, like, what are the emotions associated? Does it feel bad or heavy or grieving? And I said, it felt neutral and it felt like a choice that I was just being given. Here's a choice. Here's a new perspective. Here's a new way of seeing it. Here's a thread so you can follow the thread and better understand. And you have a choice. This is yours. You don't have to take it right now. You might need a little bit more time with this and you can take it later, but ultimately it's your choice. And this is where I love to weave these things back to the concept of free will. And that's where our free will is a choice to lean in and to do this work and to hear that which stirs from within the depths of self.
Wow, that is really interesting. Another wording that comes up for me for channeling could be, for me, it's aliveness. It's life being itself through us in all these different ways. Letting life be alive through us and starting to understand what that actually means. Could be called channeling, but it could be called life. Wild.
You said it earlier, porous.
Yeah, become porous and notice it's happening on its own. Oh, beautiful. Like you get to experience that. And you could even be like, what's choice like? You could go into a whole thing just being, you did this, right? What is choice like just now? There's worlds there. And I love where you're going because I often ask that too, of if we're offering this body to be reorganized by Earth, to be dreamed by Earth for the gift of all beings, then how do we then act from there? Right? Which you're saying is free will. For me, it's like often what I find is when I'm doing that work, there's like a coherence, there's a steadiness, there's a clarity. And then I trust my decisions that I'm making and the actions I'm taking from that place. Which is a more coherent, connected, and so I could do this with my hand, right? So in somatic, you track these movements, but it took me right back to my midline, my belly. So we're making decisions, I think, from Mother Earth and from Spirit, and you start to be an ally. That's where the warrior comes in, the activism. We're together. She's speaking through us too a bit on her behalf.
And I recognize that the activists, as you start to have more experiences of unity, consciousness, and oneness with nature, because you're immersing yourself and allowing yourself to be consumed and all encompassed by the nature that surrounds you, and recognize that you are on the same frequency, and your electromagnetic field is supported and even recalibrated by electromagnetic field of all the plant life that surrounds you, and the trees and the Schumann resonance of the planet, that you need the field that is being provided around you. And as you sit in a place of oneness, how can you not become an activist or an advocate for your life force? It's just natural. It's innate. It occurs. That activism.
Exactly. Back to naturalness. So we become, I love it. We've become connected. We remember home. And then we can trust in a way what happens next. What do you want to do? Or what wants to happen? Exploring togetherness with that for me is also right. With even doing that when I'm alone, sometimes it's harder to act. But even just having one brother or a village or a community that supports these ideas and believing in each other, go do it. How can I help you do it? And as we get more resources, we start to be able to do that for each other.
That's beautiful.
Like lifting each other up and trusting what's being dreamed through you, what's happening, and trusting that intelligence as Earth. And then
something that you've spoken to before is the depth of brotherhood, and brotherhood doesn't have to be trauma based. And that's something that I wrote down and spent some time with, because we do see a lot of these brotherhood communities and also sisterhood, which have been designed around holding people who are in a place of trauma or working through trauma. And when you said that it doesn't have to be trauma based, was something that stood out for me, because what would community look like to support individuals so that when some sort of trauma occurs, they've already have that community, rather than seeking community from a place of trauma, seeking brotherhood, seeking men's circles. And I probably will stay in the gender of male right now with you, because I know that's also a calling for you to work with young boys and doing the quest of wandering and being a guide and supporting young teenage boys, and really having somatic experience and going deeper within themselves.
And that exposure with the wild, with the mystery, is so healthy for them. And to get to feel more and then learn how to relate with the natural world and have that exposure and return to village is so important. It's ancient. That pulse is ancient. Having a village heart, trusting that you came with an original instruction at 15. Imagine if that's a lot of these traditional cultures have these kind of forms, and that we're remembering how to do these things, and to believe in them, believe they have the gift. And then the exposure is them having an interface with mystery, with death, with something much bigger than them. And they get to have that experience in a safe container, and then come back and have what they went through reflected back to them. So powerful. It's grounding. It lifts you up. It's in the design, I think, to pulse from village to mystery and back. Do that together.
And so what's the modern day quest of wandering? What does that look like? Because we don't have indigenous villages really in that way. So how can we replicate this to really bring that indigenous wisdom into the modern day without bastardizing it or even overcomplicating it?
I really respect Bill Plotkin's work, Animus Valley Institute, and I would have people lean that direction to learn more. He has many books on the topic. Journey of Soul Initiation was his newest book. Soulcraft, Nature and the Human Soul, Wild Mind. These are all books from Bill Plotkin and who I quested with. And very powerful, pan-cultural. Yeah, really about cultural regeneration and pan-cultural rites of passage. Being initiated. Yeah. Being initiated adults.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just speaking with Manesh Ibar, who created the Sphinx Code, which is an algorithm comparable to some of the work that we see in human design and also gene keys. And it's a divination tool to support us in a deeper exploration of self. And he had said something, he had mentioned that we don't have these initiation practices anymore. And it's almost like for men, our initiation practice is divorce. Once you divorce, you get married kind of young. Once you divorce, you're now a man almost, and now you're having a second life. And that second life for him looked like a new marriage and another opportunity to do it differently from a different self. But what I picked up from that conversation is the divorce is such an impactful and kind of traumatic experience in its own, but it's a force of forcing you to see yourself from a new perspective, forcing you to grow up, forcing you to mature because something that you had now crumbled, and the dying of self, right? And so that is an egoic death or a dying of self. And it's unfortunate that in today's modern world, our initiation is something like divorce.
Yeah, and there's no village to reflect what you had been through. So a lot of times I think that it actually doesn't land. It doesn't take because you don't have the village to reflect, hey, you went through something, you don't have the support. So there's myself been through a lot of initiations without a village to go back to. And man, it doesn't really quite land in the same way. So it's really why I love Bill Plotkin's work, and I aspire to do more of that as well in the future, and providing these containers where people can have, they call it, there's severance and threshold or exposure, and then the return. There's a pulse between village and building these skills like eco-somatic learnings or dance or drum, and getting those skills and then going and being exposed with that support and having that initiation, and then returning so that you can integrate what you went through out there. And it is a conscious dying process. Bill Plotkin calls the cocoon, where we dissolve and something's dying to be reborn. And this is a journey. And the soul is remembering. And I think for me, it's Earth is being remembered through us, remembering us back into place. And then we get closer to those original instructions, and then are reflected back to us by the village. Right. So this isn't anything new, right? But we just have forgotten, and we're disconnected from these ways.
Yeah, we don't really
through the
truly have the
generations.
support for integration. And we're seeing that in plant medicine work, with as many people that are doing medical psilocybin or even ayahuasca. I really believe in the certification of the coach and the process and the training and the education to become that person that can hold space. And we're not seeing a lot of that, or we're seeing it being muddied and diluted by individuals who don't have that practice and aren't carrying that torch of education forward. And so we see a lot of individuals who are going to retreat, going to ceremony. They're not truly preparing their body before entering. And then when they come out, they're not hiring the right person or have available a community that can help them integrate what they've just experienced, which means it moves in and moves out. Like some of it you retain, but not at the level of integration so
Right,
that you can use it to really help transmute and give you new direction and give you information to really
right.
create the change in your life that would make you go purge for 3 nights straight. Like let's
Absolutely.
let's
Yeah,
make
yeah.
it worth it.
Such an
Otherwise you just vomited for 3 nights straight and that's it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
you didn't actually get the medicine.
Medicine.
And that's what
No.
Village helps us
Yeah.
do, is actually helps the medicine land.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And I've done a little bit of that work, not so much these days, but I think that's somatics comes in
Yeah.
handy because it's a way to let it happen slowly. And there really is so much, again, is like togetherness
Mm.
for me. And that reflection and that thing happened if you're working with plant medicine.
Mhm.
It's a mystery happening to you and through you and
Mhm.
reorganizing you and remembering you. It's like not you doing it, you're part of it.
Mhm.
And then the village reflects that back.
Mhm.
We need that reflection
Yeah,
so that
absolutely.
it can go reorganize. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and you have, if I recall, some experience training, is it with, some elders within the Amazon pertaining to plant medicine?
Not so much training, but I have a good amount of direct experience with working with Ecuadorian elders and working with Yahe. This has been many years ago, over 10 years ago. And yeah, I deeply believe in tradition that way, like like ancient cultures that have done it for thousands of years and have those cosmologies to hold that level of power personally. That's what I orient to, and it was incredible. And yeah, it did help me a lot. And I was fortunate when I look back because I had the 3-year biodynamic craniosacral training almost immediately after that. So it was like went through this initiation with the Syncopi, the Sequoia elders, working with Yahe. Then I landed in a container of like really subtle work and biodynamics, which I think really helped it, a lot of it ground. It was a blessing.
I'm glad that you brought that up
And
because your work in biodynamic is actually something that I really wanted to touch on and
yeah,
extract that conversation and pull it forward for those who might be
thank you.
interested
Yeah.
because I think there's so much beauty to that technique and to that art form and
Mm.
I would really love for that information to go out there into the ether, see where it lands.
Yeah, I love that work so much. It's the oldest modality for me. Been practicing that for almost 20 years. With different teachers along the way. And I'm so glad you brought it up too, because even the somatic work that I do fits within that container. Like biodynamics for me means nature does it on its own. And so somatics fit within that truth. And somatics feel like the specifics, like you're tracking the specifics of that unfolding. And then biodynamics is like the big picture of this thing is much bigger than us and it's happening to us and through us and it's trackable. So biodynamics, we're paying attention to wider rhythms. And when we pay attention to these wider rhythms that move from the energy world into the fluid body, then it's like when you pay attention to those rhythms, all the sort of parts of us that aren't in harmonic with that
Mhm.
come to the surface.
Mhm.
And then those can be held and sort of metabolized as well.
Mm.
Amazing work. And the somatics is a perfect fit if you wanted to talk through it or if you wanted to meet these traumas. But you can also just be held in stillness and tap into these deeper, wider forces that it's energy into the fluids of the body. And it's revelatory that you're being breathed by something bigger. things organize around that.
Uh-huh.
These parts of ourselves start to, oh, and then you reflect back to the system what it's doing. Then it's like seeing itself when you're doing, there's so much to say about cranial work, but
Hmm.
you're focusing on wider rhythms in the energy field and it's palpable in the body.
Hmm.
The skull expands and contracts and it's going through the cerebral spinal fluid and
Hmm.
these rhythms are happening and then the system recognizes itself like, oh, that's me, I'm that big. And then the parts of us start to show up that can be potentially healed or reorganized or brought back into these origins.
What does a biodynamic session look like? Can you walk me through what that would look like to some degree?
Yeah. Yeah. It could look like you laying down on a table and supporting you to have right proximity to where you feel safe. It's field work, like energetic field work, where I'm camped out on the outer edge of your field and not invading you energetically nor abandoning you. So just setting up those energetics of safety is really important. So it might be like just sitting at the side of your table, at the side of the table that you're lying down on. And then when that coherence starts to show up, it's palpable. We can both feel it, it's trackable. And then I could actually move to your head and do some head holds, positioning that actually help with that moving, helping your system move from fixation to flow states. And then what's in between these flow states is the material that's being reflected back to you. So it's like this deep safety, self-reflective attunement that allows the system to start to open and reveal itself, present itself to you, to me, to be seen and reflected. And then do you still need to do that? Oh, look at what I'm doing. And it's bringing kindness towards the system. That's the sacred, like the psyche at work, going through a metabolic process is how I would try to say it. It's challenging.
And so at one point when we were discussing this earlier, there was a conversation like what emotions tell us about biodynamics or feelings, these somatic feelings. And there's a resonance to emotions is what I was gathering from this.
The emotions are for me. So if I'm holding someone in a biodynamic orientation, I'm orienting to their midline and to wider forces. And those are rhythmic, and I can pay attention to those. And as the practitioner, and I'm trusting these wider forces that are dropping down into the system. And this takes skill and training to learn how to do. And you're doing that. And then your system would be revealing itself through that deep listening, which might be an emotion that might show up, in which case we would allow it as intelligence, as the aliveness, reflecting back, allowing it with kindness. And when something's allowed, it allows it to change, right? There's no more resistance. It's reflected and kind. And then it can become whatever it's wanting to become. You might shed a tear. You might have a memory. But we stay with it and just keep holding it in presence.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we were
Yeah.
playing with this concept a little bit energetically through the concept of like attachment styles and the energetics of abandonment or suffocation in terms of
Mhm.
we were playing with this concept and giving it something tangible in the real day life that's happening that's a little bit more viewed today and talked about, which I think we were talking about the attachment styles. And so what's
Yeah.
suffocating, the suffocation or even abandonment, which we see in dissociative or.
Uh-huh.
What's the other attachment style that I'm missing right now?
Yeah, it's either too close or too far away, right? We're
Yeah,
either being invaded or we're
yeah,
being abandoned, or it's a little bit of both.
yeah.
And so you could even explore if someone's going like this. If
Hmm.
someone had the stability, you could be like, oh, look how you're doing that. And
Hmm.
then worlds would show up there.
Yeah, yeah,
So much learning would show up there, right?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's when it's maybe the safety is there. If you like how you and I were doing that practice,
Yeah.
but still having that impulse, which I would just honor it,
Hmm.
let that happen and then get curious about it. And then
Hmm.
it'll reveal maybe some memory or psychic story there, why that is. But
Yeah,
it's because the health is there first.
yeah. Which did
So
come up
I
for
think,
me was the tethering
right,
that was relevant, that did come forward because we held space for that moment.
don't try to change it necessarily. So setting up that
Yeah,
original proximity of my intention is to not invade
yeah.
you or abandon you. And so that's the cool part about that is that's trackable for you.
Hmm.
And then you get to guide me in that. So it's my job to actually back up or come closer, which gives you the safety for the biodynamics or
Hmm.
nature to take
Hmm.
over.
It makes me think like how powerful
Yeah.
human relationships would be if we all did inner work to this degree that we could approach relationship dynamics with more curiosity rather than making them personal attacks to the ego. And so when someone does move away from us in relationship where they're pulling away and we know that it doesn't have to be about us. Let's really go into
Mhm.
this and inquire, and this isn't about this person rejecting me. This is about this person maybe having conflict or
Yeah.
resistance to vulnerability and holding space for that. And why is that? And what's
Uh,
coming up for you? And allowing this
right.
person to feel safe through that
Mhm.
curiosity and through that attunement and reflection. And then allowing the energy to settle and see where it settles from there, which might actually be the
Exactly.
closeness that you desire. But what we see
Exactly.
happening is the other
Yeah.
person is pulling away,
Yeah.
and then it's
Yeah.
becoming internalized. And now it's about me, and it's rejection, and it's abandonment. And then it's, no, I need you to come closer. Don't go away. And it's a energetic
Yeah.
grabbing. And then the other
Right.
person is now
Mm.
moving further into that behavior. And it's
Right.
that person is moving into that behavior, whether you hold space for them or
Mhm.
not. And they actually
Mhm.
move further into that behavior much quicker when you can't hold space, but when you're able to detach and it's
Yeah.
no longer about you and it's more of a reflection of them, it also gives them permission to look at themselves a little bit differently, more with accountability and hopefully with curiosity.
Yeah. And I think it's also natural for it to be harder to
Yeah.
do because we're like triggering or
Yeah.
like poking each other, poking the right buttons. So it's,
Yeah.
I believe it's nice to have a third person
Hmm.
that can help with that, or one of us has to have the ground, a little more ground, I
Yeah.
think. And like hopefully that switches back and forth, or some conversations that I'm having with friends is,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's a setup to just have two people.
Hmm.
It's hard.
Hmm.
But if one of us can have the ground while the other one's going through it and
Hmm.
allow and do everything that you're just beautifully describing, then it
Hmm.
becomes self-reflective and right,
Hmm.
transformative.
Hmm. Yeah.
And hopefully you could switch. You could do that for
Yes.
me, right? Or
Yeah.
however the two people can do that for each other.
Yeah.
And wow, that's not there.
Yeah. There's a lot of trust there.
A lot of trust there. And
Mm.
yeah, the tools do come in handy. To,
Yeah.
can the person also that's being reflected, is there enough presence for them to staying curiosity
Mm-hmm.
with themselves.
Absolutely. That
So
most is like that's the
yeah,
key, and that's the most painful
yeah,
point, and probably the hardest, is that person
right.
trusting those who are reflecting back so that they can stay curious about themselves and not fall into disassociating or moving away from or numbing or looking for something
Yeah,
external outside of the self to distract and move them away from that work. Like, being in that
totally.
space
Yeah.
of vulnerability is like some of the hardest work, which is why, I have clients that have been with
Mhm.
me for a year and a half of doing extreme, intense work. And then I have clients that, maybe can only handle a couple months of the work, and then they have to take significant time off, and then they come back and then they take time off. So it's really how much you want to be present with self and how sustainable that is for you, what comes up for you. It's a movement.
Uh, totally. And
Mm.
again, I'm a broken record, but I think it comes back to the kind of the poverty of the times of not
Yes.
having village.
Yes.
The
Yes.
container is what we're so used to just blaming ourselves. I don't have
Yeah.
enough present. I can't stay
Yeah.
with it. Not your fault. Seeing that a lot more with clients as well. It's not personal. It's not your fault. We don't have each other anymore. I think like that village building piece is huge right now. Start to try to play with that togetherness, those containers, help
So
each other out.
of all the work that you've done, what do you, and I'm sure that all of each thing that each certification, each technique that you've been highly trained in, all have a great deal of value and all contribute. But is there one in particular that, if you could recommend that one to those who are listening as a jumping point to really start immersing into this level of work, is there a particular technique that you would say gravitate towards?
A specific modality.
Yeah.
Somatic experiencing brought a lot together for me.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that would be a beautiful place to, you
Mm-hmm.
get in, but also it's where you're at in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Mindfulness practices. I love Shinzen Young's work.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Unified Mindfulness. He wrote The Science of Alignment. Amazing work. I
Mm-hmm.
love Shinzen Young.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, somatic experiencing and Shinzen Young and earth-based anything.
So
Yeah.
I know you're in Montana right now, and if there's anyone listening that wants to work with you, that they can find you via Zoom and work with you if they're not local within Montana. But I'm
Yeah.
curious, what are you gravitating towards in terms of future work? I know that we've talked about the young men and initiation, and then I do recognize that on your website you've talked about, I believe there's something associated with orphans or orphanages.
Orphan Wisdom.
Yeah, what is that about?
Stephen Jenkinson. Stephen Jenkinson work is a beautiful work. A lot of it's about the true history of the United States and remembering our own lineages. There's so much more. He's a grief worker. He worked with the dying. He calls it the death trade that he was in for a long time. That's I consider him an amazing elder teacher. So it's really back towards remembering our own earth-based traditions and connecting with our own lineages. Like for me, I'm Scandinavian, so yeah, orienting to that lineage that goes all the way back to when we were land-based.
Mm.
So that's kind of my interpretation of just remembering those ancient ways, our own peoples remembering Earth. So yeah, I lost the thread there. Because the difference, the orphan
Yeah.
part was the trick. Yeah, it calls it orphaned wisdom
Yeah,
because
it
in the
makes
United
sense.
States we're orphaned cultures
Yeah.
come in different places, so we don't have those threads. but getting those back. I think, yeah, I'm catching the thread again. What feels one thing that does bring a tear to my eye is moving towards doing this eco-somatic work, doing the village building work outside, and really working with younger generations, because I think a lot of the cultural regeneration and the protection of the earth, that's a very ripe time for them not to, for them to keep that imagining, to keep life alive and to be a support for that. So it's really important for me, and that I won't see actually the impact, because I'll be gone by the time.
Yeah.
It takes generations for
Yes.
these things.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of grief there, but that also tells me, oh, that's
Mhm.
very important to me.
Yeah.
Supporting our young people.
Yeah. And I think that
Yeah.
brings up an invitation that I'd like to extend to the viewers is it is an indigenous concept and belief that whatever decisions we make now, we should consider the impact at least 7 generations out. And
Exactly. Yeah.
when there's a yearning to work with children, we're really trying to not just support that individual, but the generations and the ripple effect of at least
Yes.
7
Yes.
generations out. And myself, I've had a huge calling when I started going into this work, was a desire to work with children, specifically in the foster care system, orphanages, children that are being taken by the state out of homes due to abuse and things that are beyond their understanding, that it's very easy to internalize and make that and give that meaning that is destructive to the self, and that creates another lineage of toxicity and abuse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so being called in that world myself, because I want my work to echo for 7 generations. And so the invitation to the viewer is, what aspects of yourself are you sharing and offering to support that ripple effect of 7 generations? And for many of us, we end up in work that feels monotonous and dead end, and it's only for a paycheck. And if that is a place that we're at, then that doesn't have to stop us. That paycheck can actually support us in doing work off on the side that is a contribution to those 7 generations deep. And if you're feeling called to leave the monotony, to leave the extraction of being in this type of work, to do something that's meaningful, there's a calling. There's so much out there to be invited into, and through somatic work that even supports you in understanding where you want to go and how you want to express yourself in this human incarnate to support those 7 generations, the evolution and the change that is occurring, that we're all collectively here to support. And yeah, I just wanted to
Yeah,
extend
the
that
support is out
invitation.
there.
Yeah.
I love that you do that. Like, it's for them to know that the support is here.
Yeah.
People like yourself and myself that are here to support you. If you're in that monotonous job and you want support, we're here for that.
Yeah.
To support them too. Especially.
Absolutely. Supporting them and checking in with their body to hear the voice, the purpose, the call of, where is it? I'm not happy. I'm depressed. I'm suppressed. My gifts are suppressed. I can't explore them because I'm in this extraction, this transactional exchange that feels more like slave labor than it does a contribution to something greater than the self. And
it is. A lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And this podcast is a philanthropic experiment to really support individuals who are feeling called to recognize how many individuals are out there to support them in these ways. And you're one of the many glorious faces that I get to spend time with to exchange this information. And That brings me to ask you if there's anything that you feel called to explore. Maybe there's something you feel called to move and touch back on, or just how are you feeling in this moment with this conversation?
Yeah. Yeah, I think what I keep coming back to in the heart of my work is, for me, like the keeping life alive and the love of the natural world, and how clear of a reflection and how much love is there and how much support there is with Earth and our relatives. And big heart, like the heart of what I do is to protect and support nature's heart to be alive. So when I have this intention to maybe hold the 15-year-old boys in a container to help them be with the wild, is to help them be touched by it, to fall in love with it in order to be a part of it and protect it, and to keep that heart, keeping the heart of Mother Earth alive.
Yeah.
And so it's like my devotion to the land, and it's my devotion to remembering our indigenous soul.
Yeah.
No matter where we're from, we have that. And getting back in touch with soul and naturalness, and all these modalities for me have just come along the path as tools to support that ancient remembering of relationship, of the togetherness. And in a way, fighting, we have to fight a little bit for what we love, that is dying, that is being disrespected.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the generational work. It's to keep the heart of life going.
Yeah. Fostering stewards of the planet, which is our life force. And it's beyond science to recognize this. It's beyond. We've got millionaires or billionaires so separated from nature and from the earth that they're more focused on finding the ability to live on Mars, and as if the planet is completely destroyed. But it's like, all right, why don't you turn those resources inward and let's really look at the change that we can do. We have yet to find a planet as beautiful and thriving and as lush and just gorgeous and life-sustaining as Earth. This is our planet. This is an extension of us. This is us. This is the collective energy of us. Like, why would we destroy that? Why would we not look inward and give her the resources she needs?
Just abstraction. It's like there's been so much comfort that we've been able to abstract ourselves out of reality.
Yeah.
It's actually here.
It's lunacy. I want to thank you for spending this time with me and for sharing your wisdom with the viewers, those who have checked in. And I'm incredibly grateful for the work that you're doing and how you're showing up on this planet. And I'm incredibly grateful for the time that I've spent with you. I've learned so much and have had such a good experience just in the small amount of time we spent prior to this call, and how you held space and showing me how to navigate some of this modality. And so, I just have so much gratitude for you. And and if there's any way that somebody wants to experience you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Thank you too. I appreciate the work you're doing in the world, and I'm glad life brought us together in this way. And it's mysterious. People want to work with me on my website, or email works. You even can text me. So just get a hold of me, really. And I imagine you're going to provide that information. So
I'll put your
Earthways
website
Journeys is
that's
my business called. But thank you.
Do you have a presence on social media that you would like to direct people to more so than the other?
I have an IG. It has some of my writings and a bit more of the poetics and photography of the land. And my heart's in there, but came from a really good place. And yeah, my love of the land and people. It's Earthways journeys.
Cool.
Yeah, direct people there.
Awesome. I'll put all that information in the show notes. And yeah, it's such a pleasure. And I do look forward to having you back on. There's so much wisdom for you to share. And we'll be circling back in the near future. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We'll just keep going. Thank you.